the Mississippi Crop Situation Podcast featuring the Crop Doctors.
Good afternoon from the Crop Doctors Podcast studio in Stoneville. Brian made the drive over today to sit down with us and talk about cotton. So, Brian, thanks for driving over, man.
Yeah, good afternoon, fellas.
It's good to see you.
Tom, how's your world?
Pretty good. A little crazy still. The waiting for inoculum for a tremendous amount of time really set us back, and then we've had some, equipment headaches and everything else. I mean, we usually end up planting some stuff late.
Brian, y'all got everything planted?
Yeah, pretty much. We're doing our last county trial today, this afternoon. All of our research is planted and up. Looks pretty good. I will say Starkville, good grief, it's dry at the North Farm.
Really?
Yes, big time. I mean, it's funny how this weather pattern is right now, but we hadn't had a rain measurable in probably 3 weeks, maybe 4.
I say it over and over, but it literally depends on where you're standing.
Yeah,
there's some guys that are just still swirled up, cannot catch a break on the rain, and then opposite end of the spectrum, too dry.
I guess just to kind of kick things off, unless you got a question for
me.
Okay.
I'm gonna ask you something. So I just
I was jumping the gun there. My bad.
I thought about when I texted you yesterday to see if you were coming over here. I thought I got to come up with something for Brian, and I didn't, and so I just came up with this off the top of my head. Little man's big into Transformers right now.
Okay.
They actually have some pretty cool newer than us Transformer cartoons available.
Stop it.
There's also, as I was looking for Transformer cartoons on Prime and Netflix and everything, I also found newer versions of He-Man, which I had no idea existed. So my question is, multiple choice, 1980s action cartoons, G.I. Joe, He-Man, or say Super Friends?
Oh, that's easy. Hands down, the 80s He-Man. I was not much of a G.I. Joe. It was a pretty good cartoon. Me and G.I. Joe fan, but I still pull up the old He-Man YouTube.
He-Man was good.
It's a
Masters of the Universe.
It's a good cartoon.
I'm kind of sitting over here a little shocked. Brian is wearing a camouflage shirt, so the fact that he's saying that with a straight face about being more of a He-Man fan than the G.I. Joe is actually slightly troubling with that shirt on.
Well, if you know me well enough,
I know
the Rambo aspect of it all, and I'm a huge Stallone Rambo fan. The whole camouflage vibe is not so much G.I. Joe, but I mean, Rambo was he was a Marine or whatever you want to call it.
What was he?
I think it was a Green Beret.
I think he was. Yeah, I think he was a Green Beret.
And he was more of a mercenary when it came time for the movies.
Excellent movies, by the way.
He was expendable, I think he referred to himself at one time.
Well, there's a little bit of cheese associated with that, but they are pretty good movies.
Tom, did you watch He-Man?
Probably, yes. No, I think I did. Absolutely.
The newer He-Man, just like anything else, to me, they're not nearly as good. The storyline, and just the Skeletor laugh is incredible. My youngest son requested for his birthday one year, which another story, but about 2 years ago, he wanted the box set from the Incredible Hulk, like the 70s one. And I don't even know where he saw it, but that was one of my favorite movies. So we got it. We watched the whole series. And like you say, it's pretty bad, but was it Lou Ferrigno?
Lou Ferrigno.
Yeah, that's right.
That's one thing we pulled out of the closet. I don't know, it seemed like it was another one. Oh, yeah. So this year for his birthday, legit, he's like, he wants his birthday at a junkyard. What do you want to do? He said, I want a junkyard cake and go to a junkyard, and he wants to buy a car to work on. So he's been watching like Texas Metal and all these like fabrication shows. So we're like, how are we going to pull this one off? But so we might can do the cake, but I don't know.
Nice.
I was like, how many 10-year-olds want to have a party at the junkyard?
That's imaginative. It's new.
Yeah.
Not something I've heard about. That I'm impressed. Brian, obviously we have you over here to talk a little bit of cotton. Why don't you give us some insight on where we're standing, planting progress? Obviously, you get to this point in time from a calendar standpoint, and everybody talks about, don't plant beyond this specific date. But where do you think we're at based on the calls you're getting right now?
It's kind of a funny thing because I was thinking about last time I was here, and I was saying, we're rocking and rolling, and we're getting a lot of our cotton planted, and we're going to be finished early if it doesn't rain. Well, we did get to that point. We probably got 85, 90% planted, and then we're about not too far from that now, 3 or 4 weeks later. All of our main areas, I'd say, are planted, but if you go up North Mississippi, there's still some guys. They won't dry out every time it gets dry enough to plant. It rains again. Of course, southern Mississippi, far south, they plant a little bit later anyway, hurricane reasons and stuff. So, and they're not through, but other than that, pretty much planted. We're at that stage. Most of it's at that stage where it just looks like crap, like it wants to die, 2-leaf. Where it's dry, looks kind of thrippy unless it's Thrive On. But not a whole lot of replant like we've seen in the past. Most of it is going to be okay. So that's kind of where we are. We're at that stage where you don't think it's going to grow, and then all of a sudden you look up and it has grown. But we need a rain along the eastern 82 corridor.
I've been out looking at different things, different crops. Since you were here on that podcast, we're talking about a big chunk of it getting planted. And I mean, you drive around, big chunk of it is the same age. And it's that stage that you're talking about. And you got a little bit that's older than that. But for the most part, it's right in there in that spot that you're describing.
To the point of the late planting and the cutoff time, I've had a few calls about prevented planting and, what do you do? But that's just one of those questions you got to know your own books. If it's a number you're happy with, and if you could assume less risk and you're happy with getting a check versus struggling all year, I think it's probably a pretty solid move. But most of those is going to be on your, like you were talking about, is it rice or cotton? What am I going to do? So, I mean, when you're in that situation, I would probably err on the side of not planting cotton. If you're already scared you're going to make a mess planting it and then rutting it up, spraying it, you're setting yourself up for probably not the best situation.
What's the back end, Brian, on planting date?
You mean like
where we really fall off? I mean, I know there's a cutoff date for insurance, but then what's the
I would
practical
say given
cutoff?
Given an average year, probably you start to see a difference after the 20th of May. But then again, you always hear I picked 1,200 pounds planted at June the 5th. I'd say that's kind of rare. You got to have a fall that works for you.
Right, you got to
have the right variety in the right spot.
It's such a long crop, and so many things can go wrong on the back end.
And then you have to manage it different because it's going to come racing out of the ground. A lot of times it gets a lot of stature on it, and you need to be mindful of your vegetative potential and your PGR management. Because you don't want to burn time by just growing plant. You got to manage it more intensely.
I hate to bring this topic up because I already have my opinions, and we'll see what direction this goes. But the whole blown terminal situation, where do we stand on that? How many calls are you getting? How much have you seen this year? And what are you hearing related to that? And even expand that on other areas.
Today was my first phone call about that this year, but I've had tons of phone calls about it in the past. We've sent some samples to the Cornell lab. We've done just the industry itself. The seed companies have been looking into it. There's not it kind of floats around what they think the answer is. And to my latest knowledge, we still don't know. It started out thinking it was, insect pest, something causing that damage to blow the terminal, but you can't really see the insect damage. Then it went to cover crops. Something with cover crops and insects coming out of there. And then it was talk about a cotton A virus and different things like that. But none of that has been definitively decided upon to my knowledge. But what I do know, let's take the Boot Hill of Missouri, for instance. Last year, we had probably the biggest field of it, for lack of a better word, where it was consistently just blown terminals. And they spent a lot of time investigating that particular area. Well, when it was all said and done, the farmer made the best yield he's ever made, or one of. I mean, it was only a good thing. I mean, it didn't negatively influence him. So at this point, there's nothing you can really do. To my knowledge, we don't really know what it is. But I think there's some management considerations that you should take into consideration, which would be, okay, you've blown a terminal, so therefore you have 2 main stems, right? So that's twice as much vegetative growth. So that could be, I would be mindful about plant bugs. Is it more attractive? That it's a little bit more vegetative. And then with 2 vegetative stems, from a PGR standpoint, you're probably going to want to try to make sure it doesn't just try to get too vegetative on you. So And not that it will, and it's never like a whole field of it, but if there's something you can be mindful of, I would just think about the extra vegetative potential.
So when this occurs, is it random plants or is it areas of a field?
It's a little bit of all of it. I mean, if you have never seen it before, you would never notice it. You'd walk right past it. But once you start noticing, it's like, looking for deer antlers or arrowheads or something. You've never found one before. Then all of a sudden you're like, oh, there's one. Once you start seeing it, you can't not see it. It could be random plants. It could be 2 or 3 rows right here, and then it could be sections of the field, or it could, in some cases, expanses of the field. And then even within that, it would be some plants that are fine.
And last year they were talking about big acres across multiple states had the same particular symptom.
Oh, I remember
and I just
talking about it.
As I scratch my head because when somebody comes out and starts saying, "Oh, it's a new cotton virus that's going to look," viruses don't impact millions of acres. They're little patches in areas typically. And what they expand on what you said, and what the group from New York is claiming. It's the same thing that the virology group from Mississippi State and I have already published on. It's a historical virus that has inserted itself into the genome and has no negative impact on the plant.
Mm-hmm.
There you have it.
There you have it.
It's not going to negatively impact the plant. And I'll even say this. I may eat my words on that. I'll be the first to apologize to that group. I don't believe it. I don't buy it.
Does it track with one variety of seed? Like one brand of seed over another, like some of the other diseases?
Random. I've seen it, not just variety, but even across seed companies. Usually 4 or 5 leaf or bigger. So, that's probably why I'm just now starting to get some calls about it, because some of that cotton's just getting to that stage. This was a Thrive On variety, so it shouldn't have been from thrips damage. That's the first call I've had on a Thrive On variety. I told him, look, nothing you can really do. I wouldn't worry about it at this point.
Don't stop managing the crop. Focus on managing it like you would if it was going to pick bumper yield.
That's right.
Don't change anything.
If you have a few plants in the field like that, it's probably going to just add a little more cotton. That's the way I'd look at it. If it does, if it doesn't, I don't think it's going to hurt you. And like you said, that statement could come back and bite me. But either way, there's nothing you can do but manage it.
That's right.
That's all you can do.
We talked to Don and Tyler last week about thrips. Brian, we covered that we didn't do anything. They covered that pretty thoroughly. So what else is going on management-wise with the crop right now?
The weed control, some places are wet, are getting a lot of rainfall, pre's are breaking. Some places, pre's are working phenomenally, and then others are breaking sooner, different soil type. Like we said earlier, just trying to keep it clean, hoping your pre at planting carries you a little ways, so whenever you can maybe come with some Roundup and Liberty, save your dicamba shot if that's what you're trying to do. And if you can get a little size on it to where you could put metolachlor or something over the top. But I've had some people want to put it over like cotyledon to 1 and 2 leaf cotton, which I strongly recommend not doing that.
I don't like metolachlor on cotyledon anything, cotton or soybeans, particularly not cotton. And the more leaf it's got, the better. But then, like you said, if my pre plays out, I don't really have a choice. And then you get into the great debate of, do I put the metolachlor with my post-emergence herbicides or not? And people have strong feelings about that both ways.
Yeah.
And I think you can make a case for it both ways.
I think so too.
There are cases where it has hurt, and there are equal number of cases where it hadn't hurt. So I think that's just a play your own experience type game.
Yeah.
A lot of liberty going out, though.
There's a lot of liberty going out. There's going to be some missed pigweeds. I've seen it. You might just have to hoe them or live with them or whatever. And they grow so fast. I was in Clarksdale last week at our plot we have. Granted, I'm sure the pre had broken a little bit, but I said, well, we'll come back next week and spray Roundup and Liberty and then hit the thrip. It had been like 4 or 5 days, and it looked like a totally different place. I was like, what in the world? We got 1.25 inches.
I was going to say they probably caught rain every day that they were expecting to catch
It's
rain.
like as soon as you turn your backs on the pigweeds, they kind of rub their hands together and like, take off. He's gone.
Where did that one come from?
The heat, man. The last 2 weeks of getting really into summertime heat, I think is really what have kicked those off, because you're right. They're just jumping through themselves, growing. I mean, you can see that in our plots. You can see it driving down the highway, and they're just going nuts right now. And you're right. I think we're going to miss some for a variety of reasons. One big thing, aside from the rain during that period of mid-late spring period, whatever you want to call it, the middle of April to the middle of May, and on to now even, we didn't get another cold snap. We had that frost, whatever that last frost was, that was after the 1st of April, wasn't it, Tom? But really, really early April. We didn't get another real cold period. We had some cooler temperatures, but occasionally, some years, we'll get not even a frost, but a later cool event that slows those things down some. But now you've got pigweeds out there in situations where a guy got caught by the rain. So you got pigweeds that we intended to spray 5, even 6 weeks ago, when they were just coming up, if they were even up, and rain, and now they're big as a truck, and you can't kill them with anything. So I think we're definitely going to have some. I think injecting Liberty back into the system for the reasons that it's gotten injected back into the system, whether price, which is definitely part of it, and then the dicamba label issue, I think it's a positive thing, just for that variety of herbicide. But, yeah, I think we're definitely going to have some that we still are dealing with come July, and we start to get up into big canopy.
This week I think a lot of Liberty has gone out, and it's been a good week for it because it's been hot, it's been dry. And if we could just get lucky enough to get the kind of flip where these rains are training, kind of dry out in the north and south, and get the central, like the 82 corridor, a little rain, I think we'd be doing a lot better.
We dodged the two they were predicting for yesterday and today here. I couldn't believe it. Like, those are like the first, and they were, I don't remember what they were. They were over 30% chance, and all of a sudden they just evaporated yesterday afternoon. I'm like, well, that's the first time that's happened so far this year. Hopefully that's not a bad sign.
I've come to believe that the universe knew that I was probably coming here yesterday, right? And I think it's figured out that I don't live here anymore, and I moved to Starkville, because it used to rain there all the time.
In Starkville?
Yeah, and now it doesn't. So I'm convinced that it has figured out where I have moved to.
You took the bad mojo to Starkville?
It took it a while to find me, but it has caught up with me.
Before we get too far off the Liberty, for folks that are using Liberty, just keep in mind that it is super sensitive to the time of day that you apply it. So those late afternoon applications, even after dark, you're going to start losing some activity. So make sure you get that in the middle of the day, of course, wind permitting there. You can spray it too early in the morning, and you can spray it too late in the afternoon.
I know this will probably air next week, but it's never too early to be thinking about a PGR management strategy, because, again, we're planting new varieties. Again, there's a lot more Thrive On varieties. There's a lot of 23 series, last year's cotton going out this year. And so just being familiar with that variety growth habit and the vegetative potential that your fields have, and then, because you'll go from 4 to 8 node cotton relatively quick, and just if you know that you have strong vegetative potential, just spoon feeding it and getting a 10 to 12 node shot out there is always pretty good. That way you're not trying to be reactive when you could have been proactive.
Growth regulator is not one you want to try to catch up with.
Yeah, it just complicates things. Don't have a strategy based on last year. Like, I'm not going to let this happen again.
What about fertility, Brian? And that's always one of those areas that I'm sure comes up right about now in the season when people are finishing up the herbicide application and trying to address some of those fertility needs.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, there's a lot of nitrogen going out, and it goes back to use efficiency, fertilizer. I mean, that's just another expensive input, and the margins are so tight in cotton production, and people are planting it, trying to make a profit. And it's one of those things, you can tweak it a little. There's a lot of conversation about reducing nitrogen, putting less nitrates in the environment. And you can if you increase your use efficiency, obviously you can cut back on your rates. But, those words mean something, use efficiency. So that doesn't mean that you can just throw a big wad of it out there that's less than what you wanted to do and just hope for the best. I mean, you kind of have to plan it. One way of doing that is making multiple applications and kind of increasing as you go. Some people's setups aren't for, they don't have time for a lot of things like that. So that's why a lot of times we have a little bit bigger recommendation, because in our environment we have so many mechanisms for loss, and it depends on our year. It could be hot and you could volatilize, or it's going to move with water. So if it's dry and you can't irrigate, you're not getting any benefit there. So there's just a lot of things that can happen. But just to hedge against risk, it's a good idea to try to split applications if you can. And, it's kind of like cutting back on seeding rates. You can, but you don't want to. I don't recommend you just going way down and not having any buffer zone. But that's just, just trying to make smart decisions and just increase your efficiency. And, I like to have all of my nitrogen out definitely prior to bloom. And ideally, you want to go into bloom with a charged soil moisture profile, all your nitrogen out, because that's when your peak demand starts to hit. Right now, you're just putting some out there in the event, just when it can get to it, because you're not using much nitrogen at all. Then it rapidly goes up. And then when you start going into bowl and seed fill, it's just more of a relocation from within the plant. So just having it out at the right time.
What about rescue applications on anything else? Sulfur, potassium, any of those things?
You can see those deficiencies. If it's not a true soil deficiency, you can get the status of your crop. If your crop's not getting it, you can get a tissue sample. But just knowing the difference between nitrogen and sulfur, nitrogen's going to show up in the bottom of the plant, whereas you're going to see your sulfur in the top. Sometimes, that's a environmental thing when it's not a true deficiency in the soil, but you're likely going to see the sulfur on your coarser textured, low organic matter, no sulfur has been applied type situation. And you likely would have seen it in other crops too, if you're in a rotation. So you would know those areas.
I just remember Bobby ringing in the back of my head about there's no more acid rain. So we're missing out on that free sulfur emission.
The Clean Air Act.
That's right.
And
Bobby, the gift that keeps on giving.
Absolutely.
And, another thing, this is a little early because it's early in the season, but I get calls about deficiency late in the season, July and August, and it's usually potassium or nitrogen. Mm-hmm. And they're like, cotton, okay, it's a beautiful plant. It has a really fascinating architecture, and at the end it's gorgeous when it's white, but there's 2 times of the year where it's not very flattering. And one of those is now, like we talked about, and then prior to defoliation. But that's not a bad thing. So if you're seeing potassium deficiency or nitrogen low in the canopy August 15th, please don't put anything else out. I mean, you're done. And that's probably a good sign, because everything you used is going to the bowls, going to the fiber, and you can make for a whole lot easier defoliation. Don't make it green in August.
It's a good motto, Tom. Don't make it green in August.
I'll try to remember that.
Brian, we appreciate it, man.
Yeah, I had a good time. Thanks.
It's great seeing you, as always.
How many seasons of the Incredible Hulk were there?
It was at least 5. I mean, I'm talking, dude, it was like the cars and everything. It's so 70s. It's not 80s. It's freaking late 70s.
They talk about it in Gone in 60 Seconds. Don't you remember when they do all the automobiles that the people drove at that point? They play that
really
guessing.
I've never seen that one.
You've not seen Gone in 60 Seconds?
I need to.
Oh, yeah, you need to watch it.
Come on.
I know, I missed it.
Classic.
The Mississippi Crop Situation Podcast is a production of Mississippi State University Extension.